And in addition to that, if we would start developing more of our natural resources now, some of these foreign energy producers would have to start bringing their prices down. And I think, in fact, I'm convinced this legislation would start helping right away, or at least in a very short time. And we need to start putting our own people first once again instead of just helping out foreign energy producers. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Tennessee yields back his time. The gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, I yield myself 1 minute.
The gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
So here's the reality. The Republicans need money to build roads. And so they want to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma has already made clear doesn't have the votes to pass in the Senate. The same thing is true for California and Florida and off the coast of Massachusetts and New Jersey. They want to drill there as well. And it's very clear the votes aren't there in the Senate to accomplish that goal either. And as the gentleman from California just said, the likelihood of finding any revenues from oil from shale is at least 2 decades away, so there's no revenues there. So there's another bill, by the way, that's going to come out here on the floor. And in order to find the revenues, you know where they're going to drill? They're going to drill into the pensions of FBI agents. They're going to drill into the pensions of the researchers for cancer out at the National Institutes of Health. They're going to drill into the pensions of the Border Patrol agents down on the Mexican border protecting us right now. That's where they're going to find almost all of the money for this bill, in the pensions of those people. Is that really the way we want to build the roads of our country? I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves the rest of his time. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to yield 1 minute to a member of the Natural Resources Committee, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Timpson.
Thank you, Chairman Hastings. Recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman Hastings. Mr. Speaker, clearly interesting position from our Democrat colleagues. They say we need roads. They say we need jobs. They say we need an energy policy. But not here, not now, not anywhere. When we look at the challenges that we face from overseas in terms of creating American certainty for energy, it's something we all stand together for. We're looking at developing oil shale as a potential resource for this country, right here in America, to be able to create American jobs on American soil using American energy resources. Let's explore this. From the Republican side, we've clearly stood for an all-of-the-above policy. Why is there such reluctance from our Democrat colleagues to embrace developing a technology to be able to create certainty for America's energy future, to be able to help struggling young families, senior citizens on fixed incomes, to make sure that their utility bills, their gas bills, don't continue to rise? That's what we're proposing. When we're talking about protecting Colorado, my home state, many of our colleagues, can I get 1 more minute?
Gentleman, I yield the gentleman another 1 minute.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for an additional 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we're talking about Colorado, many of our Democrat colleagues joined the amendment that I put forward, stating that the Secretary wouldn't consider but shall address local concerns. If you understand Colorado water, you can't just take it. It's a priority-based system. You have to actually own that water to be able to develop it. We have a reasonable plan that we're trying to put forward to develop American energy certainty. But our Democrats' colleague, their solution of having no, not here, not now, not anywhere, is not a solution that will work for America. Let's get our people to work. Let's create certainty for America and stand up for the American consumer for a change. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, just 2 weeks ago, President Obama stood right there in this chamber, and he said that he was going to propose opening up 75% of the oil and gas resources off of the coast of the United States. That's a great plan. He doesn't want to drill off the California beaches. He doesn't want to drill off the Florida beaches or off of the New Jersey or Massachusetts beaches, but The rest of it he's pretty much saying he's open to, huh? But they're not happy with it over here. The President has a real plan, and a plan that can be implemented. What they do is they bring out proposals here that try to build real highways with fake oil revenues that are never going to materialize. So rather than working here in the real world, where the real transportation needs of our country are dealt with real revenues that are coming in, they talk about oil shale, which Shell says is at least another 10 years away. Shell oil, that is, not some Shell. I yield myself 30 additional seconds. Not some shell collector along the beaches. We're talking Shell Oil says it's 10 years away. Jim Inhofe in the Senate says the votes aren't there to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Revenue, so that's $0 as well. And the likelihood of drilling off the coast of California, off Florida, or Massachusetts for oil is 0. So rather than going through this facade of trying to pretend that real highways can be built with fake oil revenues, we should be taking up the offer of President Obama, where he says he'll open up 75% of all of the drilling possibilities off the coastlines of our country. That is what this debate should be all about.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee for the courtesy of speaking in support of H.R. 3408. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of H.R. 3408, the Pioneers Act, and by doing so, I'm standing up for American innovation, American jobs, and renewed American prosperity. Shale oil is a game changer, and you don't have to look any further than the Eagle Ford Shale in my home state of Texas to see the economic benefits of this stable American energy resource. This past Sunday, when I went to the Eagle Ford Shale, there were 171 oil rigs and 93 natural gas rigs drilling thousands of wells. More rigs are coming, and major pipeline projects are underway to support production that will grow to 420,000 barrels per day. Let me say that again, 420,000 barrels of oil per day. One of my friends on the other side of the aisle said, oil shale? No way. I've seen with my own eyes at the Eagle Ford play, and I say, oil shale? Yes way. Eagle Ford Shale job creation is now in full swing, with scores of new businesses opening up to support the boom. More than 10,000 jobs have already been created, and 58,000 more are on the way. The economic recession is a thing of the past in this part of our country, my state. The world as we've known it is literally changing in front of our eyes. Our long-established dependence upon imported energy could be a thing of the past if we unleash America's energy resources. H.R. 3408 will get us one step closer. I thank the chairman for the time. Yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yields back his time. The gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yes, I yield myself 1 minute at this time.
The gentleman is recognized.
You know, the Republicans over the past year have betrayed their agenda. They have pretty much voted out in the House floor to gut the budget for wind, gut the budget for solar, gut the budget for plug-in hybrid vehicles, and at the same time kept in the money for the nuclear industry, kept in the tax breaks for the oil industry. So that's pretty much what the debate is all about. It's about the past versus the future. In our country, right now, the American people want to know that we're embracing a future-oriented, technology-oriented, advanced technology-oriented agenda for our country. That's what all the Republicans keep voting against out here. All of the new technologies that allow us to move on from this fossil fuel era. And it would be one thing if they didn't just vote for it, but then they have the temerity to stand up and to say they believe in all of the above. No, they do not. They believe in oil above all, because otherwise they would not vote to kill wind and solar out here on the House floor over the last year.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, Senator Inhofe's quote has been thrown around here recently. Let me give another quote by Senator Inhofe, and I quote, "As I have said, we can make great strides towards increasing North American energy independence by developing our own domestic resources. We can do this and support millions of American jobs, produce affordable energy for consumers, and reduce our dependence on foreign oil." He said that in March 2010. I think that's important. Mr. Chairman, I want to make one other point. There's been implication here that it's the policies of this administration that have increased oil and gas supplies. But if you look at the President's own budget that came out this week, there are two aspects of revenue coming in from oil and gas production. You have the lease sales and you have the royalties. If you look at the President's own budget this year that came out just 2 days ago, you will see that this year and in the out years, money coming in from lease sales decreases. That means that the policy of this administration is not more energy production on public lands, it's less. He has taken advantage of the situation that's going on in state and private lands and taking credit for it with what's happened in North Dakota. This plan here puts together a solid footing for American energy production on public lands. With that, I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Washington reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
I think it would be helpful for both sides to understand what the time situation is for the conclusion of debate.
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 3 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Washington, 1.5 minutes.
Does the gentleman intend on concluding debate with his next speaker?
My intent, Mr. Chairman, is to hold that 1.5 minutes at the end of the overall debate in case you say something that needs to be responded to.
All right. So what I will do is I will yield myself the balance of the time so that I can utter the sentences that will need responding to by the chairman of the committee.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank you. I thank the chairman. So again, let's go back a little bit to this issue of natural gas and what this Republican bill calls for. More drilling for natural gas in our country. Okay, we can look at that. We support natural gas. We think natural gas is the best story that's happened in our country in the last 10 years. We love natural gas. Democrats love it. And it's half the pollutants of coal. It's domestically produced. We have to make sure that when we're extracting it, that we don't shoot chemicals down into our surface so that we pollute the water that children drink. But we think we can work through those issues if people of good faith were willing to work together. Otherwise, it's a fantastic story. Why is that? Because natural gas is not a world market. The world market is for oil. If it's $116 a barrel in China, it's $116 a barrel in the U.S. Global market. However, and that's what allows OPEC to hold us hostage, because they control all that oil coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. They control all that oil that they can basically hold the rest of the globe's economy hostage. But natural gas, not true. Here we've seen a 30% increase in our natural gas reserves over the last 5 years. What does that mean? Well, in China, it's $16. Japan, $16 per million cubic feet of natural gas. What is it in the United States? $2.42. So it's 6, 7 times cheaper in the United States. That means it's cheaper for every manufacturer, cheaper for every retailer, cheaper for every farmer, cheaper for every consumer. What are the Democrats saying? We love natural gas. Let's keep it here. Let's not be setting up terminals all across our country to export the natural gas across the planet with the Department of Energy saying that if we did that, the price of natural gas in the United States would rise 57%. How can that be good for consumers? Isn't that our advantage? Saudi Arabia is the Saudi Arabia of oil. We are the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. Why don't we use that to our advantage? Why don't we use that to inoculate ourselves against what Saudi Arabia of oil does to us by jacking the price of oil up and down? Why don't we become independent of them? Why don't we move to all natural gas vehicles? Why don't we use natural gas in the generation of electricity? Why don't we use natural gas in the production of all of our products? Why don't we use natural gas in the homes of our country, in the factories of our country, in the industries of our country at a price that's 6 times lower than China and Japan, 3 times lower than Europe? That's what we're calling for here, an energy strategy that is all American. And if we can get to that in the course of this debate today, I think that the American people will be the winners.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I just reserve my minute and a half until the end of the overall debate.
Gentleman reserves his time.
Is this us now?
Or do you want to switch?
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I rise today in support of H.R. 3408, which is known as the Protecting Investment in Oil Shale, the Next Generation of Environmental Energy and Resource Security Act. This is primarily about the Keystone Pipeline. The Keystone Pipeline has been a topic of discussion in America for the last 3 or 4 years. When it came to the attention of Congress that this pipeline, which promises to create tens of thousands of jobs and increase our access to safe and secure supplies of oil, was experiencing an unreasonable level of delay, Congress decided that we needed to step in. We have in Keystone Pipeline a company willing to invest $7 billion in private funds at no expense to the taxpayer. That would ultimately bring nearly 1 million barrels of oil per day from Canada to the U.S., additional oil per day. Even the President's Job Council agrees. Their report specifically suggested the pipeline is a win-win-win for job creation, modernizing the nation's infrastructure, and helping ultimately to lower gasoline prices in America. I would also like to point out that 5 major labor unions support the building of the Keystone Pipeline. A few years ago, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was in San Francisco giving a speech at the Commonwealth Club. In response to a question about Keystone Pipeline, whether or not they would issue the permit to build it, Secretary of State Clinton said, "We are inclined to do so." This project has now been studied for over 40 months by 7 or 8 agencies of the federal government. And normally, to build an oil pipeline in America, it takes on the average of 24 months. And when the Department of State issued their final environmental impact statement back in August 2011, they concluded that there were not any significant environmental issues. And they also said that when they looked at the option of either 1, building a pipeline, or 2, not building a pipeline, that the preferable option was to build the pipeline. And of course the rationale for that is that if you don't build a pipeline and you bring oil in from other countries, you either have to do it by truck or by rail, which certainly emits a lot into the atmosphere. But despite all of these positive reasons to build this pipeline, President Obama made a blatantly political decision when he said, I don't want to decide until after the presidential election. And that's when Congress got involved and said, we'd like a decision by February of 2012. And the President said, well, I don't have enough time to study it, so I'm not going to allow it. Even though it's been studied for 40 months, this is a 1,700-mile pipeline. The only issue left relates to about 60 miles in the state of Nebraska, and the governor of Nebraska supports building this pipeline. So this is a win-win-win situation for the American people, and I would urge our fellow members to support this legislation to require FERC to make a decision on this pipeline, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, my colleagues, I rise in opposition to this legislation. Last week, the Republicans filed this bill, this transportation bill, that the Secretary of Transportation called the worst transportation bill he had ever seen. The Republican leadership realized that not even Republican members would vote for this monstrosity of bad policy. So they've chopped the bill up into 3 parts and hope to get a separate majority on each part. This way, the House Republicans hope they can pass the bill and give their members the deniability at the same time. Now, that's not a transparent process or a fair one. It's a way to hide what is really going on from the American people. Some Republicans don't want to vote for drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Others don't want to vote for the money for the highways because some of the right-wing groups in this country are against it. So we've got this shell game going on. The bill before us, H.R. 3408, contains the text of a very bad bill that came out of the Energy and Commerce Committee. We considered that bill earlier this month. The bill provides a legislative earmark that would direct the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, to issue a permit for the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline within 30 days of receipt of an application. Now, existing law requires the President to make a determination whether this pipeline is in the national interest. Serious questions have been raised about whether this pipeline is in our national interest. It is being built with steel imported from South Korea and pipes from India. The oil it transports, I believe, will be exported to China. Meanwhile, the risks of spills from that pipeline could contaminate drinking water, which will be borne by American families. These are factors the President should take into account. But this law ties his hands. It requires, it mandates that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission approve the pipeline without addressing any of these issues. In fact, it requires approval before we even know the route that the pipeline will take. Now, this follows some Keystone Cops activities on the Republican side of the aisle. They've worked themselves up about this pipeline. So in order to get unemployment insurance or middle-class tax breaks, they put in the extension for 2 months of those areas, a requirement that the President decide the issue within 2 months or 3 months. 2 months. And the President said, I don't have all the information. I can't make that decision. So he said, I'm not going to approve it within 2 months. I'll consider it later, but I'm not going to approve it. And suddenly the Republicans realized they were outsmarted, hoisted by their own petard. They forced the President to make a decision, and he made a decision against them. They don't want to take that chance again. This bill would put in an exemption from all the laws for one pet project from the ordinary permitting requirements that apply to every other oil pipeline crossing our borders. During the committee process, we asked a simple question. Who benefits from this unprecedented congressional intervention into the regulatory process. Many media reports said that a private oil company, Koch Industries, is one of the, quote, big winners, end quote. But the committee refused, even though the Democrats asked them, to even inquire from the company, Koch Industries, whether it had a direct and substantial interest in the pipeline. They wouldn't even ask that question. Could you imagine? They talk about they're against earmarks. Then where there is an earmark that they want, they won't even tell us who benefits from it. Under this bill, the oil industry gets a conduit for exporting tar sands products from Canada to China. India gets the opportunity to provide pipes to build it. South Korea gets a market for its steel. But what do we get? Midwestern farmers and ranchers will have their land seized through eminent domain and may lose their vital water supplies to a pipeline spill in the Ogallala Aquifer. Oil prices in parts of the United States will increase as fuel supplies come into their area, and we are left with a dirtier fuel supply and higher emissions of carbon pollution, worsening the climate change that is already starting to afflict our nation. I urge all members to oppose this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves his time. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Yes, at this time I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry.
The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the language that we're discussing at this current time is allowing the Keystone Pipeline a path forward. It's based on the bill I introduced back in September, which is 3548. Keep in mind, the President of the United States killed the Keystone Pipeline. We think that was kowtowing to the environmentalist extremists, some of which may be in the House of Representatives or represented here today, but the reality is it was a wrong decision. It is in the best interest of our nation to have the Keystone Pipeline bringing oil from Alberta oil sands into the United States where it can be refined and used in the United States, offsetting imported oil from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. It creates, Keystone Pipeline would take these supplies from Canada, use them in the United States, creating tens of thousands of jobs over a 2-year to 2.5-year construction phase, with permanent jobs thereafter to maintain the pipeline and its pumps along the 1,700-mile pipeline. Now, as far as the environmental objections to the project are concerned, I wish more people would have read the administration's own final environmental impact study. It found that not building the Keystone XL would lead to more oil being transported by riskier means such as tankers, trains, and trucks. For this reason, it concluded, the administration's folks concluded, that the building of the pipeline is environmentally preferable to not building the pipeline and that its route was safe. Then the Nebraska governor requested that just for a little bit of Nebraska, that they do a 30 or 40-mile loop. The path was set, except for this little loop. Now, it would take a long time to dispel all the myths that have been perpetuated by the opponents in the environmental community. But it's worth noting that these are intrastate issues well on their way to being resolved, and in fact were carved out in the previous bill mentioned by the gentleman from California, but the President ignored the Nebraska exemption, giving Nebraska time to work through its change of route for about 40 or 50 miles of the 1,700. Never mentioned that, and killed the pipeline. So we give a pathway forward to TransCanada to refile its permit with all of the environmental documents that it has gathered over the last 3 years, presented to the administration last year, and give time to Nebraska to resolve their issue. Now, 30 seconds more. So,
As for 1 minute.
politics of the extreme put us in this position. But let's ask, who benefits from this oil coming into the United States from our partner, Canada, and being refined and used in the United States of America? If we have this, everyone benefits in our nation. If we don't have this pipeline to displace the oil, who wins? Venezuela continues to send us 900,000 barrels per day. Saudi Arabia. Our reliance just grows for these nations' oil supplies. That's who wins, Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. I yield back.
The gentleman from Nebraska yields back the remainder of his time. The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased at this time to yield to the ranking member of the Energy Subcommittee, gentleman from Illinois, 4 minutes. Mr. Rush.
I want to thank
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 4 minutes.
I want to thank the ranking member for this time and thank him for his leadership on this issue. Mr. Speaker, I find it remarkable that we are here today debating a bill that is essentially a regulatory earmark for just one company, and that company is called TransCanada. And we're here debating whether to build a pipeline through the heart of our country without even allowing the appropriate state and federal agencies to completely conduct their due diligence and their oversight responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, this legislative gift, wrapped in fine gift wrapping to TransCanada on behalf of my Republican colleagues, will completely circumvent the State Department and the other state and federal agencies, those agencies who have the know-how and the expertise to thoroughly examine this process, and will require, Mr. Speaker, they will require that FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that they issue a permit for the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline within 30 days of the receipt of the application. And if FERC does not act on the permit application within the little meager 30 days, the permit shall be considered approved automatically. Mr. Speaker, how insane can insanity get? How ridiculous can ridiculous be when we are allowing an agency, telling the agency that if they don't pass this permit within 30 days, if they don't do all the investigations within 30 days, then this permit will automatically be approved. Mr. Speaker, the Keystone XL project is too big, too consequential, too important to the American people for this country, for this Congress rather, to completely ignore all the established protocols that have existed prior and exist now and set a precedent by bypassing state and federal oversight procedures. The very people whose lives will be most affected by this pipeline deserve to have the responsible agencies complete their review process to assure the American people that this project has been thoroughly examined and vetted. Mr. Speaker, even my colleagues who may support the merits of the Keystone XL pipeline are appalled, and they shouldn't be appalled. And the majority's parties attempt to hijack the process, circumvent the appropriate state and federal agencies in order to hastily, irresponsibly greenlight this project. This sentiment can be summed up by a letter sent to me on February 9th by a citizen of this nation, a Nebraskan rancher by the name of Randy Thomas, who said, and I quote, "The short-circuiting of the process leaves those of us who live and work along the proposed pathway of this project with many lingering doubts about its safety and the impact it could have on our livelihood." That's 30 seconds.
Yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman is
Mr.
recognized
Speaker,
for 30 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, the American people deserve better than this shoddy attempt to provide TransCanada with a regulatory earmark that allows them to bypass the established rules and procedures that we have in place. I cannot support this, and I ask my colleagues to join me in not supporting this particular bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, since the gentleman yields back, I want to yield to him another 30 seconds if you yield to me.
Yes, I will
further
yield to
comment.
The gentleman from California only has 15
We
seconds
heard
remaining.
debate from the other side about refining oil. I think we ought to refine our debate, because on the other side of the aisle, the comment was made that extremists are pushing opposition to this pipeline. And from what I heard from Mr. Rush, and what I understand the case to be, is that those who ordinarily make this decision should have all the facts. And I don't think that is an extreme position at all. Thank you for yielding to me. Reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky.
How much time remaining do I have?
The gentleman from Kentucky has 2 minutes.
Well, I would recognize myself for 2 minutes.
The gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, we're here today because it's time to decide. President Obama and his administration have made a decision not to decide, even though his own Secretary of State, in their final economic environmental impact statement, made the decision that if you looked at two options, one, build the pipeline, or two, not build the pipeline, the preferable route was to build the pipeline. 1 million more barrels of oil a day coming to America ultimately. We're facing ever-increasing gasoline prices. There's only 60 miles at issue at all in this pipeline out of 1,700. 5 major labor unions support this pipeline. There's not one dime of federal dollars in this pipeline, unlike the millions and billions that this administration have given to wind power and solar power and battery companies, many of which are in bankruptcy, just like Solyndra, which received $538 million from the taxpayers of America. This is a private company willing to put in $7 billion to bring 100,000 more barrels of oil a day, willing to provide 20,000 additional jobs to construct this pipeline. And so I think the decision here is very easy for the American people, and that's what Mr. Terry's legislation does. Since the President won't make a decision, Mr. Terry directs the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to make the decision. We have all of the data necessary, and it's the right decision to make, and with that, I'd yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I will yield back my time.
The gentleman from Washington yields back the balance of his time. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources, printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Titles 14 and 17 of Rules Committee Print 112 through 14 shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as an original bill for the purpose of further amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered read. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in Part A of House Report 112 through 398. Each such further amendment shall be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in Part A of House Report 112-398. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-398, offered by Ms. Eshoo of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 547, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Eshoo, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year, in the bipartisan pipeline safety bill that was signed into law, I worked with Chairman Upton to include language which requires the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which is called PHMSA, to complete a comprehensive review of hazardous liquid pipeline regulations. This review will determine whether the current regulations are sufficient to ensure the safety of pipelines used for the transportation of diluted bitumen or tar sands oil. Everyone agrees that this review makes sense. The House and the Senate both passed the pipeline safety bill without a single member of Congress voting against it. What doesn't make sense is directing the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to issue a permit for the Keystone XL pipeline before we know whether our safety standards are adequate. Last year, Cynthia Quarterman, the administrator of PHMSA, testified before the Energy and Commerce Committee that the agency, stating that the agency had not done a study to analyze the risks associated with transporting diluted bitumen. We've heard concerns that pipelines carrying tar sands oil may pose greater safety risks and may be more corrosive than pipelines carrying conventional crude. According to a recent whistleblower who worked as a safety inspector for the first Keystone pipeline, he said, quote, "This oil has the consistency of peanut butter and is similar to sending heavy grit sandpaper down the steel pipe," unquote. So we're not talking about a theoretical risk. In July 2010, a pipeline carrying tar sands oil ruptured near Marshall, Michigan. Over 800,000 gallons of oil spilled into the Talmadge Creek and then flowed into the Kalamazoo River. A year and a half after this spill, the cleanup continues and is expected to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Oil tar sands, unlike conventional crude oil, sinks to the bottom of a river, making it especially difficult to clean up. TransCanada's first Keystone pipeline doesn't really inspire confidence either. This is a brand new, supposedly state-of-the-art pipeline. It was predicted to spill no more than once every 7 years. But in just a year and a half of operation, it's reported 14 separate oil spills. In North Dakota, over 21,000 gallons of tar sands oil have been spilled. And these spills are a warning to all of us that we need to get this right. This is not a subject to be taken lightly. We've seen in my neck of the woods, in the northern part of the county where I live, in San Bruno, California, an explosion, natural gas pipeline explosion that killed 8 people, it injured dozens, and it destroyed 38 homes. The federal government has been regulating pipelines since 1968, and we're still seeing explosions like the one in San Bruno, California. I think it's dangerous Mr. Chairman, to move forward with the tar sands pipeline before we have the proper safety knowledge and procedures in place. So my amendment is really quite simple. It requires the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to review the results of the PHMSA study before issuing a permit for the Keystone XL pipeline. I think this review is important for the safety of Americans who will be living near this pipeline for decades to come and who rely on the rivers and the streams and the aquifers it will cross. This approach makes sense. It's also far less costly to build pipelines correctly than to try to fix or replace a line that's already built. So for all of these reasons, I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I will yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Kentucky, for what purpose does the gentleman rise?
To speak in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I do so reluctantly because we all have such great respect for Ms. Eshoo of California. She is a hard-working member of the Energy and Commerce Committee and provides great leadership. But we oppose this amendment for a couple of simple reasons. Number one, this study by the Department of Transportation is going to be made anyway. We're not stopping that at all. Number two, Keystone will transport a grade of crude oil that has been in our nation's pipelines for decades. There's nothing really new about this substance. Venezuelan oil has about the same density. Certain Saudi Arabian oils have basically the same density. Studies by the Canadian government and private sector engineers in this country have demonstrated that heavy oils and diluted bitumen are not more dangerous or corrosive than regular grades of oil. We have not found any evidence to the contrary of those studies. And the reason that we're opposing this amendment is this: because this amendment would say you cannot begin this pipeline until this study is completed. And our position is we want the study to go forward. We've waited over 40 months to get the approval to build this pipeline. The American people need this pipeline. America needs this additional oil. And if the study comes back and comes up with significant or any safety issues, I can assure you that Congress is ready to act to address those. But there's no indication that there will be a problem. And so for that reason, we feel quite confident that this pipeline should be built. We want the study to go forward, but we want the permit to be issued to build it now, as the Department of State recognized in their final environmental statement back in August of 2011. And so I would urge the defeat of the Eshoo amendment, and with that I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. Pursuant to Clause 6, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Like a roll call vote, Mr. Chairman.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in Part A of House Report 112-398. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr.
The
Speaker.
clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in Part A of House Report Number 112-398, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
Pursuant to House Resolution 547, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized. 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the purported benefits of the Keystone Pipeline have achieved mythic status. We have been told that this pipeline will lower gas prices, even though TransCanada says gas prices will go up. We've been told tens of thousands will be hired to build it, even though only about 5,000 or 6,000 temporary construction jobs will be created. And in a particularly egregious descent into fairyland, we have been told that the oil coming through this pipeline would enable us to reduce our dependence on oil imported from unfriendly Middle Eastern or Latin American nations. Last month, Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper even said, when you look at the Iranians threatening to block the Strait of Hormuz, I think this just illustrates how critical it is that supply for the United States be North American. But under this bill, the Republican bill, there is no guarantee that even a drop of the tar sands oil and fuels will stay here in this country. They keep saying how great it would be if we had 1 million barrels of oil coming into the United States from Canada. There's no guarantee in this bill. And that's because many of the refineries where the Keystone crude will be sent plan to re-export the refined fuels. This is the map of what the oil industry plans on doing with this oil. Comes right through the United States, and then it heads off to Asia, South America, over to Europe. And Valero, one of those refineries, says that in its investor presentation that it plans to refine the Canadian crude at the same facility it is building at Port Arthur, Texas, an export zone, because doing so leverages its export logistics. Our amendment will say this oil coming through this pipeline from Canada stays here in the United States and doesn't head off to China. That's what the amendment's all about. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska rise?
Claim the time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself to the time as I may use.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he wishes to consume.
Thank you. This is one of those myths that we must try to dispel. I guess if you say it enough times, some people will start believing it. But the reality is, why would you build a pipeline 1,700 miles branching off to several refineries along the way to our main refineries in Texas and Louisiana, simply to put it on a boat, send it through South America over to China, when they're already discussing, because the president denied this permit and set off a little bit of an international fury, sending a message to the rest of the world that we're going to kowtow to the environmental extremists as our energy policy in the United States. They are now talking about, or have been for some time, of just building a pipeline straight from the Alberta tar sands up here all the way to Vancouver coast. Now let me just read some of the articles, since Prime Minister Stephen Harper went to China last week to court them to buy the oil that the United States just rejected when the president denied the Keystone XL permit. This is from Ottawa CTV article. Says he also, meaning the Prime Minister, made a subtle dig at environmentalists who helped block TransCanada's planned Keystone XL pipeline, which would have carried Canada's oil to refineries in the United States. We uphold our responsibility to put the interests of Canadians ahead of foreign money and influence that seek to obstruct development in Canada in favor of energy imported from other, less stable parts of the world, he told the dinner. By the way, he was referring to Saudi Arabia, Middle East, and Venezuela, where we're getting our oil now, and will continue to do so unless this Keystone pipeline is built, offsetting up to 1 million barrels per day. In Bloomberg, on February 10th, Harper said he has continued to profoundly diversifying the country's energy exports that will facilitate construction of new infrastructure needed to ship the country's oil to China. He's not talking about Keystone Pipeline. He's talking about the new one along the west to Vancouver. Canada, which holds the third largest oil reserves, is seeking to reduce its reliance on the United States after President Barack Obama rejected TransCanada Corp's $7 billion Keystone Pipeline to ship Canadian oil to the Gulf Coast. We want to sell our energy to whoever wants to buy it. That's why he went to China, because obviously it's not the United States. In an oil and gas journal, states that Harper's visit was described as an open warning to Washington after President Barack Obama rejected the Keystone Pipeline. It's not a subtle warning, it's an open warning. Harper has said the Keystone was a wake-up call, said Mr. Jiang, an energy expert at the University of Alberta. Now, next, Washington Post. Chinese state-controlled Sinopec has a stake in a proposed Canadian pipeline to the Pacific Ocean that would substantially boost investment in Alberta oil sands. From today, February 15th, Kinder Morgan Pipeline, this is from the Houston Business Journal, says that the chief of the Port Metro Vancouver, the city's port authority, said that Port would be willing to undertake the dredging and infrastructure work necessary to allow bigger ships into the port that would carry crude shipped to the coast from Alberta oil sands. The reality is, if you want this oil to go to China, kill the XL pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, and let this one be built in Canada, which Canada is already preparing to do. And I will reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch.
The gentleman from Vermont is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman. Keystone is not the energy future that advocates claim it is, but if in fact the Keystone Pipeline is built, then this amendment says that that oil, in fact, should be used in the United States to reduce our dependence on oil. It appears right now that if this pipeline is built, it will be for the purpose of transporting tar sands oil from Canada down to Houston for refining and then export to Latin America and China. That's very much what is on the mind of many people. You can't have both. Have that pipeline be essentially a conduit for export and claim that it's going to reduce American dependence on overseas oil. This amendment speaks directly to that, and it allows those who claim that Keystone will allow us energy independence to guarantee in law that that will happen. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Nebraska.
Inquire as to how much, thank you, how much time is remaining on either side.
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 2 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Nebraska has 1 minute remaining.
I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank my colleague. Mr. Chairman, oil companies are running a multi-million-dollar lobbying campaign to approve the Keystone Pipeline, a pipeline the owner itself says will cause the price of oil in Middle America to go up, not down. Here's what the oil company TransCanada said in its own application. Additional producer revenues are possible if the Keystone Pipeline also relieves the oversupply situation in the Midwest. It goes on to say the market prices of Canadian heavy crudes should rise in the Midwest. This gives new meaning to the phrase voodoo economics. Only in a party bought and paid for by the Koch brothers would politicians have the audacity to claim that raising oil prices in America will lower gas prices, help consumers, or improve national security. Our amendment prevents oil companies from gouging American consumers by requiring that any oil pumped through the Keystone Pipeline stay in America, which is ostensibly the avowed purpose of the pipeline. With that, I yield back to my friend from Massachusetts.
Thank you, gentleman.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Nebraska continues to reserve. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Again, could we get a review of the time remaining, Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 1 minute. The gentleman from Nebraska has 1 minute remaining.
And could you inform me as to who has the right to close?
The gentleman from Nebraska has the right to close.
Okay, then I yield myself the remaining minute.
The gentleman's recognized.
The gentleman from Nebraska says, what's the problem? All the oil is going to stay in the United States. It's not going to China. That's what will happen if we don't build the pipeline. So they should vote for the Markey Amendment, because the Markey Amendment could only be guilty of redundancy, saying all the oil stays here in America. So if that's your purpose, that's what the Markey Amendment says. So we'll hold you to your word when we have the vote. But here's the real plan. TransCanada puts the dirtiest oil on the planet into the brand new pipeline Republicans are giving it. 2, TransCanada sends that oil to the Gulf Coast, where it can make billions more than where it currently sells it in the Midwest. 3, refineries in the Gulf Coast re-export it to other countries at world oil prices and don't pay any taxes to the U.S. for doing so. 4, Americans get higher gas prices and no increased energy security. 5, TransCanada, Hugo Chavez, and the sheikhs of Saudi Arabia laugh all the way to the bank. Please vote yes for the Markey, Connolly, Cohen,